Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Wednesday, February the 24th, 2021. My apologies about not being on the air on Monday and Tuesday. I'm still working out my problems with YouTube. I haven't come to any definitive decisions yet, but I'll have to probably over this weekend. I had rather thought that seeing as the political, social climate had reached a point of rank hysteria back in November of last year, and then especially after the debacle at Capitol Hill on January 6th, and for a couple of days afterwards, that things would begin to calm down after that. Instead, they have only gotten crazier, including where I live. Specifically, I believe I've told you that there is a motel, formerly a motel, now a homeless shelter directly across the street from where I am staying, and it is a madhouse. The police are there every day. It would probably be easier for the police if they put up a pop-up station there, because they are across the street so very often. Someone was arrested yesterday. Just the death threats being screamed and the insults and the cries of the insulted and the injured. It hardly ever stops. I also suspect that there's a fair amount of drug dealing going on out of that building, based by the to and fro that I see. This morning at about 10 after 1, I was awakened by some woman screaming, and then various people got involved, and this went on for about 2 or 3 hours afterwards. I'd go back to sleep, and then I'd be shaken awake. Oh, what is it now? Oh, it's the same insanity. But there we are. Let's talk about a man I will describe as the director of the National Institute on Allergy and Infectious Diseases of the United States. He has a well-known name. His surname is 5 letters. I have to be very careful about what I say now. I think you all know who I'm talking about. He has become one of the most famous men in the world over the last year, and he seems to be reveling in his fame. This is a story from Charlie Spearing at Breitbart. This physician recommended yesterday that Americans not go out to eat or go to a theater even after getting the coronavirus vaccine. There are things, even if you're vaccinated, that you're not going to be able to do in society. For example, indoor dining, theaters, places where people congregate, he said. That's because of the safety of society. And who died and made him dictator? This doctor said he wanted Americans to continue restricting their public activities due to high levels of coronavirus in the country. He said even vaccinated people could conceivably be infected by the virus and have it in their nasopharynx, which is why he recommended that vaccinated Americans continue to wear masks. We hope that when the data comes in, it's going to show that the virus level is quite low and you're not transmitting it. We don't know that now, he said. He responded to a question from Chris McGarrian of the LA Times during a press briefing. McGarrian expressed concern the public messaging was underselling the vaccine, making Americans less enthusiastic about getting it. Oh, I don't know. Perhaps they could do what Israel is doing, according to Alex Berenson. He's quoting from Ynet News. Israel's Knesset passes bill allowing use of personal information of people refusing vaccines. Berenson comments, Israel is moving towards shaming people who don't want to be vaccinated by disclosing their personal information to local hospitals so they can be urged to get the shots. Berenson asks, hey, why not just make them wear a yellow star. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle P. Walensky said some guidance for individual behavior would change, but the community restrictions would remain. And does the CDC have the authority to institute these community restrictions? I thought that was down to mayors and governors. Acting administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Andy Slavitt, said Americans should be interested in taking the vaccine because they want to live. They don't want to be sick and they don't want to die, he said, and that is a very important benefit. Yes, the benefit of life that people don't often talk about quite as much. No. Americans, Westerners in general, are not terrified of death. No, of course they're not. That the public, we believe, clearly understands, but people aren't talking about it quite as much. But the people, we believe, clearly understand. Okay, Mr. Slavitt. He said the Biden administration would continue to study the data and loosen restrictions only after it was safe. Okay, the scientific team is going to continue to study based upon prevalence, based upon vaccination levels, and based upon the data, and we'll come out with more. It's because it's a talismanic word now, isn't it? Data. We're going to consult the data. Rather like chicken bones or tea leaves. What does Matt Walsh have to say with the doctor's statement? These are the words of a power-mad lunatic. I can't say that I disagree. I'm going to go to Lockdown Skeptics here. Will Jones, once again, please bear with me because I don't know what it is precisely that I said last week that got two of my live streams scrubbed. Something about the prophylactic you take against a disease. All right. Coronavirus Endgame. With the publication on Monday of the government's roadmap out of lockdown, the COVID crisis enters its final phase in the UK, albeit a painfully extended one. The government has ruled out zero COVID, and hooray for that. And despite earlier reports not included infection or case levels in its criteria for sticking with its timetable, save for the reference to increases in infections threatening to overwhelm the NHS. However, it is still beholden to the modelers, with reports that a faster timetable was shelved following an intervention by sage scientists who claimed that it would cause 55,000 more deaths, or was it 91,000? Jeffrey Tucker in AIER has written, there is a sense in the air that the pandemic is winding down and the toxic culture of division, fear, and hatred along with it. Cases are down dramatically. Deaths, too. Hospitalizations are no longer irregular. Restrictions are being repealed. You can follow all the action daily at the CDC's new and usually competent landing page on the virus. It only took them a year to build this. I'll just note that Governor Death, Andrew Cuomo of New York State, I mean, he's done now, isn't he? The revelations of forcing infected people into nursing homes, then the revelation that this was hushed up, information removed from the official New York State webpage, Cuomo lying about it, and then his media spokeswoman saying, well, all this happened because we froze, her word, because we were afraid of prosecution by the federal government. And now he has been charged with sexual harassment, which in this case I would describe as an opportunistic infection. People were afraid of Cuomo, deadly afraid of him before. They are no longer afraid of him. And so the knives are out. Tucker continues, despite all the talk of a new normal and infinite mandates, there is hope that it could all unwind quickly, pushed by force of public impatience and frustration with restrictions and a political scramble to avoid responsibility by running away from all that they did for the last year. The list of signs and symbols could be made very long. The politicians who overreached are suddenly being held accountable, with both Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom on the hot seat. Calls for governors and mayors to resign consume state and local news. There is clearly major political tumult building. The Great Barrington Declaration scientists can hardly keep up with the requests for respectful interviews now that it is becoming clear that they were right all along. The experience in open states like Florida, Georgia, South Dakota, and so on makes it impossible to ignore the grim truth that the lockdowns achieved nothing for public health but did harm health, businesses, liberties, law, and civilized life. The push to open economies by the same people who locked down the economy, such as Boris Johnson, is an implicit repudiation of the nonsensical zero-COVID movement. Everyone seems to now agree with what AIER has been saying for a year. Humanity must deal intelligently with pathogens and stop pretending that political forces can control them. AIER visiting senior fellow Naomi Wolf had a hit just last evening on the Tucker Carlson show, and they spoke as allies in the reopening efforts after years of ideological sparring. A year ago, Slate was making sense until the virus became political, and they joined the lockdown mob. Now the publication is back to making sense again. British medical journal The Lancet is publishing excellent short pieces on the cost of lockdowns, including this riveting letter from Martin Kulldorff. A prestigious European journal of public health has published a blistering attack on the very idea that a power government should ever be trusted with is virus mitigation. The people who have committed their careers and lives to this pandemic and the policies surrounding it might soon need to find a new raison d'etre. Then the cleanup begins. How did this happen? Who did it? How to make sure it never happens again and does not end perhaps for decades. Let's see. Oh, yes, Florida. Lockdown Skeptics contributor and mathematics student Glenn Bishop has got in touch with a suggestion of something we could all send to our MPs to challenge their lazy lockdown thinking. In short, look at Florida. On Monday, Boris Johnson answered nearly 100 questions from MPs and journalists. No one raised the case of Florida, the obvious counterexample to the course laid out by Johnson. I am yet to see an MP or SAGE member acknowledge the case of Florida. That needs to change. Empirical data from an experiment, which has already taken place, will always be a better measure of what to expect when repeating the experiment than speculative modeling based on dozens of assumptions that already predicted the first experiment wrong. That is why it is crucial policymakers take a long, hard look at Florida before assuming their favorite modelers are on the money. The Imperial team predicted 2.2 million deaths for the U.S. within months if there was no restrictions. Accounting for population, that would estimate over 143,000 deaths for a state the size of Florida. Despite having one of the oldest populations in the U.S., its current death toll stands at just 30,000, less than a quarter of the original Imperial estimate after a year, including a winter, never mind 143,000 in the few months. Trying to explain to MPs how or why the modeling is inaccurate is mostly a futile endeavor. However, showing them reality of where the experiment has already been undertaken and the models proved wrong can hit them between the eyes. In September of last year, the governor of Florida called in an expert team, including specialists from Stanford and Harvard universities, to assess whether restrictions had been effective enough to justify their continued use. They concluded they had not been. Subsequently, on September 25th, the governor nullified all public health measures connected to the coronavirus emergency. Instead, he targeted resources on shielding the vulnerable and offering sensible advice to the public. And we have seen what has happened. Neil Ferguson has been mixing it up with people who follow lockdown skeptics. And Derek Winton, the software developer who wrote the original article for Lockdown Skeptics on Saturday criticizing the Imperial model, kept his email succinct. Ferguson gave a prickly reply. Winton writes, I made 8 substantive claims in the article along with supporting evidence upon which my conclusion was based. Having read your correspondence with other parties, it does not appear that you have directly contested any of those claims. I'll summarize them here. The imperial model was influential in the decision to pursue a lockdown strategy. The research for Report 9 was not peer-reviewed. The model was not documented. You appear to have no formal training in computer modeling, medicine, or epidemiology. Projections of death tolls from your team in previous epidemics had been out by several orders of magnitude. The code was of poor quality from a legibility standpoint. The model is an attempt to model a highly complex and therefore highly sensitive system, but omits at least one key variable. Projections based on the imperial model for Sweden were out by a factor of 7, and therefore the model was not fit for purpose, which, if any of the claims, are incorrect. And Ferguson rabbited on about loaded and scientifically irrelevant questions. Neil Ferguson's training is in theoretical physics. Why that entitles him to decide what Britain and a large part of the rest of the world should do in response to a virus is a very interesting question that has not been answered to my satisfaction, and not to the satisfaction of many others. And is there anything else here? Oh, yes, there's a quotation from George Orwell. The further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. I'm going to look at Alex Berenson here again. Again, have to be very, very careful because I suspect that it was me quoting from him that got me in trouble last week. I do like this, though. At a time when the rest of the super billionaire class is firmly in the leftist orthodox camp of I'm fixing your life even if I have to destroy it, and I can tell you about global warming from my private jet, we are very, very lucky to have Elon Musk popping balloons at every chance. This is from the Washington Post, where democracy dies in darkness. Tesla did not respond to repeated requests for comment. In response to emails seeking comment, Musk replied only, "Give my regards to your puppet master." Too funny. Berenson tweets, "Hey, I'm looking to buy a Surgeon General. Know where I can find one?" And this is from MedPage Today. Op-ed, Vivek Murthy's multi-million-dollar conflicts are cause for concern. The Surgeon General nominee will only treat corporate America's woes. Over the weekend, Dan Diamond for the Washington Post reported that Vivek Murthy, MD, nominated for Surgeon General, and to help the Biden COVID-19 response, received $2.6 million in pandemic consulting fees and speaking engagements since January 2020. Murthy received $400,000 from Carnival Cruise Lines for consulting, another $400,000 in cash, and another $400,000 worth of stock from Airbnb, nearly $300,000 from Estee Lauder. Don't they make makeup? And $600,000 from Netflix. The article notes, quote, most of Murthy's consulting work came after Biden effectively cinched the Democratic nomination in April 2020 after rival Senator Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race, and he was sometimes touted in speeches as a Biden advisor. Let's have a look at the chat here. You okay, says John S. I am okay, apart from my problems with YouTube and the fact that where I'm living is doing my head in. There's not been show since Monday, as far as I could tell. No show since Friday, actually. This is my mask. There are many others like it, but this one is mine. My mask is my best friend. It is my life. Without me, my mask is useless. Without my mask, I am useless. That's from Anne Run. Very good. Of course, this is from a famous Marine's Prayer that we all know from Full Metal Jacket. One of my favorite movies. Matt Bex is the highest paid federal employee is you know who. He also just received a $1 million prize from the University of Tel Aviv. Okay, glad to see you back, says Neil Terryway. Thank you. Roulette Cracked says 2020 was a shit test. Oligarchs pushing buttons. The response by the masses was a huge fail. We've only emboldened them now. Bad juju. It's not. It's very rare that it's the masses that make these kinds of decisions. You know. Carl Henry says, "Wow, prophylactics get banned now. Join Odyssey, KMG. I've had to go there to find censored content, even from BitChute now." KMG, what happened to your old blog, The Ambler? Well, it died for the second time years ago. Actually, you can still find it at the Wayback Machine if you're interested. That's from Palpcasso 88. Again from Cecil Henry, MSM COVID may be down, but the fear of COVID is at all-time highs, right? We hope, please. I don't know how the fear of COVID-19 could be at all-time highs after a year of this. I don't really know. You know, I recall, I mentioned this on the live stream about the time I started it, that when I was living in a different place in Victoria, a more salubrious place, I would walk down to Save on Foods from my apartment, and people would literally walk onto the highway to avoid me because they saw that I had gray hair. We have a lot more people wearing masks now than then, but that kind of fear I'm not really seeing to the same extent. And, Judas Fly Chai says KMG is a grumpy old man. Oh dear. Oh, well, I try my best. Let's talk about something a little different. But it's all related. It's all about fear and hysteria and intersectionality. It can't last because this is quite literally the war of all against all. And it has become a kind of terrorism. This is from Jim Kunstler's column on Monday. It's called Repentance. You'd think that a wobbling civilization plagued by failures of economy and politics would have better things to do than submit to the crypto-religious ghost dance of racial hysteria called being woke that preoccupies its thinking class. Case in point, the vocational martyrdom at Smith College of a lowly staffer called Jody Shaw, who objected publicly to the ritual indignities heaped on her by colleagues and students in the name of social justice, that is, the holy war against whiteness. Ms. Shaw, a divorced mother with 2 children and 1993 Smith alum, worked as a student support coordinator in the Department of Residence Life, that is, dorm counselor. She was asked to denounce herself in staff meetings about systemic racism and complained about it through the proper channels, which only invited more hectoring abuse. In frustration, she finally posted a video on the web to expose the Stalinist bullying that was allowed to infect every corner of campus life at Smith. The admin offered her a cash settlement to shut up and get lost. Shaw turned it down, but resigned anyway in a long letter to Smith President Kathleen McCartney that she made public about the college's hostile workplace. How does this happen? Because wokery, above all, is about status, and the elite schools exist to confer status on the young people who can get into them, who then move on into an adult life of high status, high-paying employment facilitated by their old school connections. In prior times, the elite schools accomplished this by offering a superior education via superior faculty and superior curricula. Lately, the emphasis has shifted to promoting sham moral superiority because it is a shortcut to gaining power over other people. And nowadays, elitism is no longer about excellence, but just raw power over others. As the woke hysteria ramped up on campuses across the nation and the various colleges and universities started competing to outdo each other in moral fanaticism, Smith College vied with its sister schools and the other Ivies for wokest of all. The moral black hole at the center of this vicious nonsense is the spectacular failure of authority of the people who run these institutions. Smith President Kathleen McCartney supported and encouraged the woke inquisition on her campus. She gets paid the tidy sum of $515,461 a year. Maybe she didn't want to give that up by taking a principled stand against bad behavior and bad ideas. Maybe she favors the rule of bad ideas and unprincipled behavior. Is she stupid or depraved? And of course, what about a huge staff of vice presidents and deans, not to mention the school's board of trustees? To what degree are we seeing simple cowardice? Ms. McCartney got stung in 2014, the year of the Ferguson, Missouri riots, when she sent out a campus-wide email trying to mollify the inflamed student body under the heading "All Lives Matter." This was early in the woke frenzy, and the phrase "all lives matter" was just then getting minted as a form of hate speech. So McCartney apparently made an innocent blunder for which she was forced to pay with one of those abjectly disingenuous apologies that had become the standard dishonorable response to the woke coercion. Eventually, she learned a lesson with that. Just go with the flow. The wonder is that not one other adult on that campus has the decency to speak out against the new Stalinist fashion or to support Jodi Shaw. It must be self-evident, Kunstler writes, to many of the people caught up in this mob madness that the woke crusade is dishonest, stupid, cruel, and evil. All it really accomplishes is to generate more racial animosity while it paints people of color as not having the personal wherewithal to get on in their lives without extra special assistance from people not of color. But having sacrificed their sense and their honor, how can people in authority repent? As author James Lindsay puts it on a podcast at his New Discourses website, quote, "They have been supporting this thing that they can see for themselves as complicit in evil. They intuit it, but psychologically they cannot let themselves see it, because to admit that what they see in front of their own eyes, to admit that it's obviously as bad as it is, that the theory itself, systemic racism, is worse than bankrupt, it's evil, requires going through the entire psychological process of admitting to yourself and to others around you that they got duped and they carried water for that evil thing. There's a high psychological cost to admitting that you were dumb and got tricked, and there is a high social cost for both of those things as well," unquote. It's been my experience that this almost never happens. Because if you were to say that you were dumb and got tricked by an idea, particularly after you had invested so much of yourself and possibly your institution in it, would be in effect to tell the rest of the world, you should never listen to me again, and I should not be earning, say $515,461 a year for any job. Kunstler concludes, "Yeah, there should be a cost. I hope Jodi Shaw sues the living shit out of Smith's College, its president, and its board of trustees. She has a GoFundMe page. It contains the video she made. Send her some money so she can support her kids and hire a lawyer. There's a desperate need to impose consequences for the failure of authority in this land and to put this insane race hustle behind us so we can get on with the task of preserving civilized life in a society that is about to implode from further failures in economics and politics." And he notes, as of Tuesday morning, GoFundMe has released the temporary hold on Jodi Shaw's account. Well, more university madness from the University of British Columbia, where I toiled for 12 years. This is an absolutely incredible story. And I sometimes get the impression that it would be easier to count all of the crazy people who work for colleges and universities than the opposite. This was from a story from February the 4th. UBC prof who alleged anti-Indigenous discrimination deletes tweet appearing to dox 12 former students. Dr. Amy Wolf, an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Education, who called UBC anti-Indigenous for allegedly destroying her interim reports of 12 students, deleted on Wednesday morning a tweet which appears to expose the names of those students. In the tweet posted Wednesday before dawn, Wolf called the students the Dirty Dozen and listed 12 names which she said were the subjects of the reports. "May our Indigenous babies be safe in colonial institutions," the rest of the tweet read. Wolf tweeted Wednesday afternoon that UBC had contacted her to delete the original post. I was threatened tonight by UBC. Remove the post revealing names of racist teacher candidates or be acted upon, she alleged. It's an ugly, insane, and old war. Their lip service is archaic. Change now. She has since deleted her Twitter account. And I noticed that Charlotte Alden and Andrew Ha of the UBC, which is the official student campus newspaper, I guess they thought that her tweet was a little too spicy. So, yeah, I'll get back to that in just a minute. Well, how about right now, actually? How about go straight to that? And Reddit has the tweet. Well, no, this is something else from Amy Wolf. Recall how a UBC prof by the name of Dr. Amy Wolf lied about being Indigenous and doxed 12 of her students over personal grievances. Well, since being exposed by Dr. Darrell LaRue, a researcher who's dedicated his entire life to studying the phenomenon of race-faking pretendians a la Elizabeth Warren, she's decided to send him death threats. Quote, forgive the profanity, it's just not the same without it. We're coming for you, motherfucker. This is the day when you look in the mirror and see a little dribble of shit coming from the corner of your eye because you're full of it, and you will pay the price. Fuck you, racist hold of life. If it's the last fucking thing I do, I will bring down your career. Go to hell, racist motherfucker. I'm after you, and I will get my kill. Unquote. This comes after Dr. Wolf spent her day blogging about her colleagues at UBC are sociopathic zombies who cannot speak for themselves. Yes. University life. How much it has changed. This is from the Vancouver Sun, February the 19th. The University of British Columbia has terminated the contract of a lecturer on Indigenous education without cause. Matt Ramsey, UBC Director of University Affairs, confirmed Wednesday that Dr. Amy Wolf was no longer with the university. Wolf has been on paid administrative leave since January and last month was ordered by UBC to take down a post on her now deleted Twitter account that named 12 students who had transferred out of her Indigenous Education in Canada course offered within the Faculty of Education. Mandatory, by the way. Mandatory. Not her version of the class, but the whole instruction in Indigenous education is mandatory for all education students at the University of British Columbia. According to a copy of the termination letter provided to the UBC, Wolf's teaching contract had been canceled without cause Wednesday, and she would receive a lump sum payment as per her employment contract. You are immediately relieved of all duties and must no longer represent yourself as being employed by the university, the letter stated. The letter was from Faculty of Education Department head Dr. Bly Frank and stated that the UBC Board of Governors had terminated her contract on the recommendation of President Santa Ono. Wolf was hired in 2015 by the UBC Sauder School of Business as an Aboriginal education consultant. Ramsey said the university was aware of recent social media posts regarding Dr. Wolf. Quote, UBC continues to offer supports to all those involved. I can confirm Dr. Wolf is no longer with the university. For privacy reasons, we will not comment further, unquote. Let's get to her. Before we get to her blog post, Dr. Wolf is embroiled in an argument with a faculty member at St. Mary's University in Nova Scotia who referenced a claim on Twitter challenging Wolf's Indigenous background. Oh, you're not going to mention the fellow's name? Any particular reason? What's this reporter's name? David Carrick of the Vancouver Sun. This has led to an angry email and blog post from Wolf to that associate professor at the university's Department of Social Justice. And do we have her blog post here? This is again from Reddit. Dr. Amy Wolf calls Dr. Charles Menzies and Dr. Jennifer Berdahl sociopathic zombies and professors gone nuts. In her latest blog post, Dr. Wolf also leaks a private email sent by Dr. Berdahl regarding legal action. Here's some quotations. You're zombies, Jennifer and Charles. I don't care what letters are behind your names. You show that you cannot think. Know that you have declared war on a person who is willing, able, and resourced to fight you, and I will. To my people's survival against sociopathic zombies like Jennifer Berdahl and Charles Menzies. Interestingly, Dr. Wolf also reveals some of the things in her blog post. She leaks the content of a private email that Dr. Berdahl sent her when they were still on good terms, also revealing the identity of the lawyer she contacted. Okay. I found this part of her blog post pretty interesting. I feel very much the descendant of my Micmac grandmother. All my life, I have received dreams and spiritual guidance that have led me to here, educating you about the validity of oral history. Yeah, I thought universities were supposed to be about empirical evidence. But I suppose not. It's all about magical thinking now, and that's precisely what critical race thinking is. Magical thinking. Apparently, white people have magical powers, which they express under the rubric of alternately white supremacism or white nationalism. Dr. Wolf, who now refers to herself in the third person at her blog. Let's refocus on the issue hot-headed tweeters. Nothing hot-headed about Amy Wolf. And types who report on what is happening between Dr. Amy Wolf and UBC. This is exactly the command of the English language that one would expect from a university instructor. You've gone completely astray. You're not even writing about the issue anymore. This has turned into a National Inquiry-esque, high school-like mobbing scenario and a pathetic smear campaign spreading untruths about me and painting me to be inhuman. It's just completely stupid. The issue I documented in admin-signed assessments that some teacher candidates in my class showed tendencies toward white supremacy and contempt for Indigenous content. Dr. Santa Ono himself ordered these destroyed because a parent of one of the adult students complained they were excessively harsh. Okay, this is not just unethical and immoral, it is potentially criminal and points to a corrupt and incompetent, biased administration. But hey, who cares about that? Let's put on our bikinis and get into the mud ring. Wrestle time. Yeah, nah. You're not Indigenous, shouts Daryl LaRue, lashing out with his mud-slicked hand to punch me in the face. Yeah, you're a liar, shows my former true friend, Dr. Jennifer Berdahl, as she kneels on my chest. I can't breathe, I tell her in an email. She couldn't care less and doesn't respond. Oh, and let's talk about my mental health, as Jonathan Kay writes in the National Post. My mom died. Maybe I'm unhinged. Maybe this is all about how crazy I am. People, you have generally gone nuts. You are out of focus. You are completely failing to do the work of decolonization. These systems in Canada are changing as people like me infiltrate them from the inside. Sure, I was spat out. Big surprise, but the truth remains. And when the ridiculous dust settles, yes, ridiculous dust, the totally insane drama. This woman sounds as if she's 15 years old, but I suspect a lot of female university professors, adjunct or otherwise, sound like 15-year-old girls now. The totally insane drama about what people who know nothing about me say, we're going to be left with the same problem. UBC is a steadfastly colonial institution led by old colonial guards who are unwilling to change. Please, people, wake up and remember, Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for almost 2 decades and called a terrorist. I will point out that at his trial, Nelson Mandela cheerfully confessed to being a terrorist. You could look this up. She continues, Christ was crucified, Malcolm X got shot. Do we want to talk about who is responsible for the murder of Malcolm X? I don't think we want to do that. Too embarrassing. She continues, Dr. Amy Wolf, I'm a leader. This is what leadership looks like. It uproots the central root that is feeding off the dark heart. It's a root that's feeding off the dark heart of land theft, injustice, and inequality. What's happening is the oldest story and one that we seem to transcend. We shoot the messenger. This woman is illiterate. But this is the sort of people who get hired. Dr. Wolf had mentioned Jonathan Kay, who has had some interesting pieces lately in the National Post. This is one from a month ago. If there really are 300 neo-Nazi groups in Canada, why can't anyone name them? For years now, progressives have been warning that neo-fascism represents a growing cancer within Canada. Since the riot at the Capitol, in particular, the Toronto Star has instructed us that white supremacy, not just everyday racism, but the real deal, is now an overt presence in public life. The New Democratic Party has jumped on board hard as well under the banner, Take Action, Dismantle White Supremacist and Neo-Nazi Groups in Canada. Jagmeet Singh's party informs us that, quote, there are 300 active far-right extremist groups operating across the country, unquote. Now, given that the most powerful, influential neo-Nazi group in Canadian history, the Heritage Front, was funded and led by the federal government, the Canadian federal government, I would suggest that Ottawa, the departments concerned, could simply consult their books to find out the names of these neo-Nazi groups, because they are probably funding them. So how many? 200? 300? Less? The number seems to change. And this number pulled out of a hat. But no. Here's where it gets awkward. Kay writes, I phoned around and no one at the NDP offices seemed to have that list. Instead, they referred me to Barbara Perry, director of the Centre on Hate, Bias and Extremism at Ontario Tech University. I should point out that I've been aware of Barbara Perry for quite a few years. She is not a person that few have heard of, but let me assure you, she is a very powerful person indeed in my country. The 300 figure appeared in a 2019 interview with Perry published in a sponsored content outlet funded by the Ontario government and labor unions. Again, more astroturfing. Oh my God, Canada is under threat from fascists. How do we know this? Well, this anti-fascist researcher is telling us. Oh, and who pays this woman? Guess who? In that interview, Perry claimed that even by 2015, she had identified more than 100 active far-right groups across Canada. And then the number became, 130 and then 300. I emailed Professor Perry this week to inquire about where I could find her database. Unfortunately, she told me that she wouldn't be releasing the information until spring, even though she's been sitting on the list for 2 years. When I asked why, she explained that releasing the list wouldn't make sense unless the data were couched within a larger published report, such as the one she has planned. I would like to quote her full response, but she would allow me to do so only if I showed her a draft of this article first, which I declined to do. So what exactly constitutes a dire threat to Canada? Well, in a 2018 Critical Criminology article entitled A Climate for Hate, an exploration of the right-wing extremist landscape in Canada, Perry defines the focus of her research, right-wing extremism, or RWE, as, quote, a loose movement characterized by a racially, ethnically, and sexually defined nationalism. Sexually defined nationalism, ooh, often framed in terms of white power, grounded in xenophobic and exclusionary understandings of the perceived threats posed by such groups as non-whites, Jews, immigrants, homosexuals, and feminists in the interests of preserving RWE heritage and their homeland, unquote. That definition sounds precise, but as I read through Perry's 20-page journal article, I became progressively more interested in how she applied it. Perry mentions in passing at least a dozen infamous Klan groups that really do cater to hate-addled whack jobs, such as the Klan and the Aryan Guard. No argument there. But then she glides into a more general discussion of populist right-wing groups that promote the language of borders, boundaries, transgressions, or territory. Hate does not emerge in a vacuum, she warns, citing Antonio Gramsci's theories on the ongoing struggle for hegemonic supremacy, but rather is embedded in broader patterns of subjugation, Kay comments, this kind of language could easily sweep in anyone who expresses concern about, say, immigration levels or even advocates travel bans to stop the spread of COVID-19. I believe that is the whole point. In her conclusion, Perry writes that the vitriol of the hate groups is not so much an aberration, it isn't, as it is an extreme, albeit extreme, reflection of racialist views that permeate society, which suggests that the line between hate groups and everyone else is blurry. Approvingly quoting Bell Hooks' denunciation, he's capitalized Bell Hooks' name, which I think is more than a microaggression. Could be a hate crime. Bell Hooks' denunciation of the white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist bloc. She accuses all of us, politicians, judges, political lobbyists, and more, of creating a climate which bestows permission to hate. Context is crucial, Perry wrote. This is the key lesson to be drawn from our observations of the landscape of right-wing extremist activity in Canada. Hate groups are nourished by diets of public and political sentiments that resist change and seek to counter the advancement of typically Canadian values of inclusivity, equity, and multiculturalism. And Jonathan Kay concludes, political sentiments that resist change, that's literally just a derogatory description of mainstream conservatism as the movement has existed since Edmund Burke polemicized against the French Revolution. And that's all it takes to get labeled a right-wing extremist. You can see why the NDP is happy to cite Perry's claims without asking inconvenient questions about when we'll be allowed to scrutinize them. Well, it's not just the NDP. It's the Liberal Party as well, and increasingly the Conservative Party. People who are guilty of political sentiments that resist change are guilty of hate. They're guilty of white supremacy, white nationalism, und so weiter. Let's go to the chat. Cecil Henry says, white supremacism is when non-whites demand to be with whites and manipulate them. White nationalism is when whites give non-whites the wonderful opportunity to be free of whites, both unbearable. Yes, Chogokin 666 sees the pattern. Christ, Malcolm X, Mandela, Amy Wolf. Steve says Malcolm X, some harsh words for his own people. He'd be banned from YouTube these days. And Steve points out that the biggest terrorist attack in Canadian history was a Sikh separatist group bombing an Indian airline. Jonathan Paul, hello, Professor. I have just recently discovered that British anthropologists like Keith and Pitt Rivers that believed in race persisted in the 1930s. I wish somebody would do a YouTube show on them. Metal Mike says, glad you are back, KMG. Well, it's nice to hear from you again. My Trail of Disgrace says, for live streams, try Trovo or DLive, Entropy or Streamlabs for donations, BitChute, Odyssey, or Rumble for archiving. BitChute, maybe the others as well, have methods for auto-archiving channels. Paul Racine says, police siren number 2, spring and summer should be fun. God, I hope I'm not here in the summer. When is spring? It starts, what, in 4 weeks' time? I'd really prefer not to be here then either. Roulette Crack says the West is implementing an Indian-type caste system. Oh, I believe it was Thomas Fleming, the former editor of Chronicles magazine, who wrote, what, about 30 years ago, that the West was reverting to the status justice of the Middle Ages. Alex Delarge says KMG Odyssey. Why is it misspelled like that? Apparently has a feature where YouTube streams videos upload automatically to their platform. Yes, thank you for that. Appreciate that a great deal. Mary Crow says, thoughts on Ferlinghetti's passing? Apart from the fact that he is 101 years old, I don't really have any thoughts on him. I can't say that I'm particularly fond about the Beats. And back when I worked for the UBC, I was forced to catalog books by Allen Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky and that lot, and pretty harrowing they were. Okay, so let's talk more about, oh yes, Jonathan Kay mentions that some Toronto sketch group that, of course, I've never heard of, called the Sketchersons. Get it? They posted this message on Facebook. This may be the most Canadian thing ever written. In June of 2020, the Sketchersons released a statement on social media in support of Black Lives Matter. It was taken down the following day. While writing the statement, we contacted the current and former Black members of the troop for input, but released it before we received feedback from everyone we reached out to. The white members of the group prioritized being a part of the BLM conversation over listening to Black voices. We were virtue signaling. Furthermore, we pushed for a quick response during a traumatic time for the Black community. We rushed the statement and we didn't reflect on our own complicity in upholding white supremacy within the troop. Our actions were insensitive and disrespectful, and we are sorry for the pain we caused. The Sketchersons has been and continues to be predominantly white. Boo! And has not done the work. They use this word seriously, work, to create a welcoming space for BIPOC performers. Like much of live comedy in Toronto, our show is currently on hiatus and will remain so for the foreseeable future. That's a shame. If when the show returns, we will regroup and further expose how we can prioritize the voices, safety, and inclusion of marginalized people. Sincerely, the Sketchersons. Don't comedians tend to be marginalized people by definition? Perhaps I'm not understanding that word correctly. Oh, and one other thing from Jonathan Kay. He mentions this this hysteria in Canada following the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January the 6th. And yeah, if it happens in the United States, whether it's good, bad, or stupid, there will be immediate demands for it to be implemented here in Canada. And that has been the Canadian way since, the 1960s, I suppose. And what the riot in the Capitol in January 6th has to do with Canada, not much, really. Not much. Kay writes, if you're Canadian who's come of age in the social media era, wholesale adoption of American social justice memes is probably something you just take for granted. Yes, I could point out that slavery never existed in Canada because slavery was banned throughout the British Empire 34 years before the Dominion of Canada was founded, and slavery was banned in Lower Canada in the 1790s. There was no Jim Crow, of course, in Canada, but do the people who write in our newspapers, speak on television, do they actually know this? I suspect that they don't. Oh, yes. And there has been some unpleasantness in the United States in recent weeks with reports of Asians being attacked by blacks. And Canada is apparently jealous of this. This is a story from The Hill today. MPs advocates urge more government action to combat pandemic of anti-Asian racism. Everything is a pandemic now. Most MPs and advocates, rent seekers in other words, who spoke to the Hill Times connected this resurgence in hate to the COVID-19 pandemic with Liberal MP Han Dong, noting that communities have come together in response. Strangely, this is all about COVID-19, and there is really no description of who exactly is committing this abuse. I suspect because it could be embarrassing. Theophilus Chilton writes about a tweet from Ellen Oh Hell No. Okay. We also have to remember that this is a classic strategy of white supremacy, breed hate and violence among the minority and lower socioeconomic classes. We must all fight against this together. This is all of our responsibility. Oh, yes, it's white people in the United States going out onto the streets and beating up non-whites, is it? That had not been my reading of the data. Chilton responds, tweets like this are interesting, but they provide a glimpse into the inner workings of the woke intersectionality alliance. Right now, there is an inter-party, intramural conflict going on about whether Asians are going to be kicked out of the alliance or not. On one hand, there have been a lot of rumblings about how Asians are too successful and therefore are white adjacent. Again, more white magic. As a result, there are significant factions in the WIA who want to drum Asians out. On the other hand, there are factions in the WIA, such as the OP, presumably that means Old Party, who know the WIA needs Asians because they are richer and more competent than the other demographics involved. Thus, we see ridiculous arguments trying to tie Black people attacking Asians to white supremacy. The point to the argument isn't to exactly convince people that Blacks targeting Asians to beat up is connected to white supremacy. Rather, it's to signal to the constituent parts of the white intersectional alliance that it's wrong-think to get off the blame whitey narrative. And you know, my country has become significantly more unpleasant in recent decades, but I'm now pretty much come to the conclusion that it is actively evil. As mentioned previously, our Supreme Court, the 9 unelected men and women in black robes who actually decide what happens in this country, consent to the governed, ho ho, very satirical, decided that not only prostitution was legal, but that physician-assisted murder, aka euthanasia, is legal as well. And furthermore, that the government is not passing legislation that results in more people being murdered by physicians. This is a piece from National News Watch by Dr. Don Lenihan. He's a senior associate at the Institute on Governance and an intellectually respected expert on public engagement, governance, and policy development. I don't really know what that means. For more, visit his website at Middle Ground Management. Oh, he's in the middle ground. Does this mean that he's a PR spiv? Andrew Balfour is managing partner at Rubicon Strategy in Ottawa. Yes, so he is indeed a PR spiv. Last Friday, Justice Minister David Lametti asked the Supreme Court for fourth and final extension on revising the law on medical assistance in dying. MAID. Oh, isn't that a cute acronym? The Senate's amendments on Bill C-7 appear to have hit a nerve, and presumably the government feels it must respond. But will it do the right thing? Will it now recognize MAID for what it is, a fundamental shift in our values on death and dying? Yes, specifically killing people because they are depressed. I am not making this up. Lenihan and Balfour continue, for many people, assisted dying is a journey that started with the easier cases. Yes, there's a famous ancient saying in law school, hard cases make bad laws. But no, in Canada, hard cases make the best laws. Hard cases such as terminal cancer, since the Supreme Court's Carter decision in 2015, other more controversial illnesses have entered the picture, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's. Many of us now feel comfortable bringing these under the new law, but the journey is far from over, and the really hard questions on MAID have barely been raised. Indeed, the government is shielding us from them. The 2016 law effectively limits MAID to terminal physical illnesses, despite a compelling case that Carter is much broader. We shouldn't be surprised. The issues here get frighteningly complex very quickly, and the government was uneasy from the start. Perhaps it felt the court had went too far on assisted dying. You like that euphemism? Assisted dying. Okay, here we go. Bill C-7 is the government's response to that ruling, and it brings some parts of the law closer to Carter. However, in a surprising news, it then doubles down on the cautious approach by introducing a new distinction between mental and physical illnesses and declaring that mental illnesses don't qualify for MAID. The rule is confusing at best. Those of us who watch someone's faculties wither from Alzheimer's probably aren't sure where their physical suffering ends and their mental suffering begins or why it matters. Even experts disagree. In fact, the real target here is not Alzheimer's or dementia, but a different class of mental illnesses such as severe depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Apparently, the government's goal is to prevent any such illnesses from qualifying for MAID under any circumstances. Oh, okay. Canadians are poorly informed on mental illnesses and often emotional about the subject. Okay, so on the one hand, we are told on a daily basis, and I believe there's a whole month devoted to this in Canada, that we need to remove the stigmatizing of people with mental illness. Now we're moving beyond that. In a bold move, we're going to start culling them. Yes. Oh, and Aaron O'Toole, does he have anything to say about this? I don't know, but he tweets today. Aaron O'Toole is the leader of the Conservative Party. Bullying is unacceptable and has lasting consequences. Today, my family and I are wearing pink to stand with kids who are feeling the weight of the world right now. We're here with you. Aaron is wearing a, how would you call it, a salmon pink shirt, where his son, this poor kid, is wearing a two-piece outfit, a very pink indeed, almost a party pink shirt that says in the style of splashed ink, "It's never cool to be a bully!" Exclamation point. And he's wearing this over some sort of sweatshirt, and he's making a sign. His body is posed like this, and he's pointing to himself. And if Aaron O'Toole were determined to have his son bullied at school and elsewhere, he could not have done a better job. Oh, yeah, we all have to wear pink today. Oh, that has nothing to do with homosexuality or effeminacy. No, no, no. Then why did you choose pink? Why did you choose pink? Come on, we all know why. We all know why. Before I get to Daniel Dale, formerly of the Toronto Star, now with CNN. Oh, this is very, very interesting. Oh, and this is a tweet from Aaron Mate, and it's tagged, "These materials may have been obtained through hacking." Reuters, BBC, and Bellingcat participated in covert UK Foreign Office funding programs to weaken Russia, leaked documents revealed. So, are we going to see Twitter label posts from BBC and Reuters and Bellingcat that notes that these are propaganda outlets? This is a piece from the Grey Zone by Max Blumenthal. The UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office have sponsored Reuters and the BBC to conduct a series of covert programs aimed at promoting regime change inside Russia and undermining its government across Eastern Europe and Central Asia, according to a series of leaked documents. The leaked materials show the Thomson Reuters Foundation and BBC Media Action participating in a covert information warfare campaign aimed at countering Russia, working through a shadowy department within the UK FCO known as the Counter Disinformation and Media Development. The media organizations operated alongside a collection of intelligence contractors in a secret entity known simply as the Consortium. Through training programs of Russian journalists overseen by Reuters, the British Foreign Office sought to produce an attitudinal change in the participants, promoting a positive impact on their perception of the UK. These revelations show that when MPs were railing about Russia, British agents were using the BBC and Reuters to deploy precisely the same tactics that politicians and media commentators were accusing Russia of using. Chris Williamson, a former UK Labour MP who attempted to apply public scrutiny to the CDMD's covert activities and was stonewalled on national security grounds, told the Grey Zone. I'm just going to proceed from the assumption that until proved otherwise, all mainstream journalists are feds. Of course, Canada's journalists were bought off by $600 million from Pierre Trudeau's government, which doesn't affect their disinterested approach to the news. Oh, no. Well, why would it? Why would it? So Daniel Dale is the famed fact checker from CNN, who I believe cataloged the 97,000 lies told by Donald Trump when he was president. This is from Mediaite. CNN fact checker Daniel Dale was one of the busiest people in the cable news business for several years, but he has almost completely disappeared from the network's programming over the past month or so. What happened? Dale became a veritable household name among cable news viewers during Trump's presidency, tallying and debunking false or misleading statements by Trump. Since joining CNN in June 2019, Dale has appeared or been mentioned on the network more than once every other day on average, according to the Internet Archive. That exposure dropped sharply after November the 4th, and according to the TVI's media monitoring database, since President Joe Biden's inauguration on January 20th, Dale has only appeared on the network once, and that appearance last Friday was to fact-check Donald Trump's lawyers. Dale is still doing presidential fact checks, but they have thus far been relegated to CNN's website. John Avlon pointed out earlier this month there's just something different about the exercise these days. And noting the growth in fact-checking during the Trump presidency, Avlon said in the opening days of the Biden presidency, fact-checkers have been adjusting to a new normal. Take this headline from CNN Daniel Dale. He went through Biden's big economic speech and found several claims worth fact-checking. The accuracy was usually a question of calculations or characterizations, debatable details, but far from willful lies. Yes, perhaps if Daniel Dale is too disappointed in the media, he could go back to his show business career. I remember him as one of the bright young sparks of Glee, a show that brought so much joy into our lives. Oh, kids in cages. Evil Trump putting kids in cages at the Mexico border. This is from Christine Lila at the Gateway Pundit. White House Press Secretary Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, on Tuesday got very testy with Fox News' Peter Doocy when he asked about the Biden admin's policy of putting migrant children in cages. The Biden administration opened a gated migrant facility for illegal immigrant children this past weekend in Carrizo Springs, Texas. The camp will hold up to 700 illegal immigrant children. The facility was open for 1 month during the Trump years and then was shut down. Democrats like AOC went ballistic about caged kids during Trump's tenure. Democrats completely ignored it under Obama, and now they're defending it under Biden. Psaki said that putting migrant kids in cages is not putting kids in cages because we are in the middle of a pandemic. Got it? This is not kids being kept in cages. She said this is a facility that was opened. The press secretary defends the reopening of a child migrant facility in Texas, despite comments from Kamala Harris calling babies in cages a human rights abuse. Well, as always, it's not a bad thing when we do it. Some pretty curious people appointed to Joe Biden's cabinet. This is from Penny Starr at Breitbart. Representative Deb Haaland, a Democrat of New Mexico, said Tuesday at her confirmation hearing to be Secretary of the Department of the Interior that she has to acknowledge that Capitol Hill, which includes the U.S. Capitol and House and Senate office buildings, is on land belonging to Native Americans. Well, this statement alone disqualifies her from her post because what she's saying is she does not believe that the United States is a sovereign nation. This is the quote here. I wouldn't be here without the love and support of my child Soma, partner Skip, my mom Mary, Toya, my extended family, and generations of ancestors who sacrificed so much so I could be here today. I acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Nacotchtank, Acostan, and Piscataway people. Yeah. A cabinet that sounds like America. Oh, yes. Once again, I had thought, the Democrats are in charge of everything now. And after the excitement died down after January 6th, they would just get down to the business of running everything. But no, their enemies must be silenced. This is from Peter Barry Chowka at The American Thinker. In a shocking development in the ongoing censorship debate, two influential Democrat members of the House of Representatives have taken the first steps to challenge the continued availability of conservative channels Newsmax, OANN, and Fox News on mainstream cable, satellite, and streaming television platforms. Multi-Channel News reported on the story yesterday in an article titled House Dems Pressure Distributors to Justify Carrying Fox News. Others. The Democrats' February 22nd letter to Comcast, AT&T, Dish, Verizon, Roku, and the 7 other companies demanded that they respond to a laundry list of 7 intrusive and intimidating questions. Here are some. What moral or ethical principles, including those related to journalistic integrity, violence, medical information, and public health, do you apply in deciding which channels to carry or when to take adverse actions against a channel? In other words, you must justify why you allow these people we don't like on the air. Do you require, through contracts or otherwise, that the channels you carry abide by any content guidelines? If so, please provide a copy of the guidelines. How many of your subscribers tuned into Fox News, Newsmax, and OANN on fill-in-the-company's distribution platforms for each of the following weeks preceding the November 3rd, 2020 elections and the January 6th, 21 attacks on the Capitol? And it goes on. And it goes on. So, all right, we won the election, and now we're going to shut down your news channels. Glenn Greenwald, to his great credit, does not hold with this. On Substack, he writes, not even 2 months into their reign as the majority party that controls the White House and both houses of Congress, key Democrats have made clear that one of their top priorities is censorship of divergent voices. On Saturday, I detailed how their escalating official campaign to coerce and threaten social media companies into more aggressively censoring views that they dislike, including by summoning social media CEOs to appear before them for the 3rd time in less than 5 months, is implicating, if not already violating, core First Amendment rights of free speech. Now they're going further, much further. The same Democratic House committee that is demanding greater online censorship from social media companies now has its sights set on the removal of conservative cable outlets, including Fox News, from the airways. The committee argued some broadcasters and cable networks' increasing reliance on conspiracy theories and misleading or patently false information raises questions about their devotion to journalistic integrity. Oh, I didn't know that it was the House of Representatives that were responsible for determining what constitutes journalistic integrity. And this is the very question that Greenwald asks. Unless you believe in the right of the government to regulate and control what the press says, a power which the First Amendment explicitly prohibits, how can anyone be comfortable with members of Congress arrogating unto themselves the power to dictate what media outlets are permitted to report and control, how they discuss and analyze the news of the day? But what House Democrats are doing here is far more insidious than what is revealed by that creepy official announcement. 2 senior members of that committee, Representative Anna Eshoo, Gesundheit, and Representative Jerry McNerney, also sent their own letters to 7 of the nation's largest cable providers, as well as to digital distributors of cable news, demanding to know, among other things, what those cable distributors did to prevent conservative disinformation prior to the election. After its disinformation, they said, that just so happened to be spread by the only conservative cable outlets, Fox, Newsmax, and OANN. I don't remember, we'll get to that, whether Greenwald notes this, but these words misinformation and disinformation have been conflated, and they do not mean the same things. Misinformation could be said to refer to statements that are objectively untrue. Disinformation is the deliberate promulgation of statements known to be untrue. Those are not the same things. Disinformation is, by definition, sinister. For the last 4 years, Greenwald writes, we were inundated with media messaging that Trump posed an unprecedented threat to press freedoms. The Washington Post even flamboyantly adopted a new motto to implicitly ratify that accusation while claiming it was not Trump specific. Other than the indictment of Julian Assange, which most Washington Democrats cheered, what did the Trump administration do in any way of attacking press freedoms that remotely compares to Democrats abusing their majoritarian power to force the removal of conservative cable outlets from the airwaves, just days after doing the same with dissident voices online? There's not a peep of protest from any liberal journalists. Do any of the people who spent 4 years pretending to care so deeply about the vital role of press freedom have anything to say about this full frontal attack by the majority party in Washington on news outlets opposed to their political agenda and ideology? Evidently not. While many conservative outlets are covering this story, it is difficult to find any liberal outlets writing about it at all. An article from the New York Times was one exception, though it largely attempted to justify these censorship efforts with paragraph after paragraph purporting to demonstrate the dangerous misinformation spread by these channels. Revealingly, these same two members of Congress who sent this threatening letter to the cable providers said during the Trump years that freedom of the press must be safeguarded at all costs. The First Amendment prohibits Congress from making laws that abridge the freedom of the press, and we cherish our country's culture of free expression. They intoned when writing to the FCC in 2019 to complain that Russian news outlets were concealing their affiliation with the Kremlin. In a statement emailed to me and publicly posted, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr denounced the Democrats' actions as a marked departure from First Amendment norms. Now, yeah, and of course, the Democrats, CNN and the like, they MSNBC, they've never engaged in conspiracy theories, misinformation, or disinformation. Actually, they have, because they knew right from the beginning that Russiagate was a hoax, which was conjured up by Hillary Clinton's campaign. Let's see. I wonder what he has to say about Russiagate here. And I will just find this. Okay, yeah. It's RT that is the real threat, apparently. And Matt Taibbi has written about this as well. He's another, well, I'd say he's an honest lefty. Very few of those around. This is from his Substack. 2.5 years ago, when Alex Jones of InfoWars was kicked off a series of tech platforms in a clearly coordinated decision, I knew this was not going to be an isolated thing. Given that people like Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy were saying the ouster of Jones was just a good first step, it seemed obvious the tactic was not going to be confined to a few actors, but corporate media critics insisted the precedent would not be applied more broadly. I don't think we're going to be seeing big tech take action against Fox News anytime soon, commented CNN's Oliver Darcy, who, by the way, is one of those sinister men in the American media. Darcy was wrong. Just a few days later, calls to ban Fox are not only common, they're intensifying, with media voices from Brian Stelter on CNN to MSNBC analyst Anand Giridharadas to former Media Matters critic Eric Boehlert to Washington Post columnist Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy, and Margaret Sullivan all on board. The sequence of events is ominous because a similar matched set of hearings and interrogations back in 2017 when senators like Mazie Hirono at a Judiciary Committee hearing demanded that platforms like Google and Facebook come up with a mission statement to prevent the foment of discord. Could this be any more nakedly totalitarian? To prevent the foment of discord. So much of what, if you're going to remove discord from the news, what are you left with? The chess column, the bridge column, the recipes. The so-called media reporters at major organizations like CNN and the New York Times, Taibbi writes, have either been mostly silent or have played cheerleading roles during the most eyebrow-raising recent developments. The decision by Facebook and Twitter to block access to a pre-election New York Post story about Hunter Biden, the stunning exercise in monopoly influence by Amazon and Apple in swallowing up the free speech platform Parler, the banning of Socialist Worker Party accounts in England and the US, and the shutdown of live stream capability by alternative media outlets. And the removal of celebrated footage shot from the Capitol riot by people like status coup videographer John Farina, a story that amazingly only got major play at Fox News. Complainants really make an effort, Tebby writes, to make an effort to distinguish between opinions they find obnoxious and actual lies or errors, the blurring of lines between misinformation or disinformation, and reporting that simply has political effects deemed deleterious by Democrats and their pals in media has been going on since 2016, when, for instance, the leaked but true Podesta and DNC emails were regularly described as elements of a misinformation campaign. It was the same with the Hunter Biden story last autumn, when there was no evidence that any of the material was false, but newspapers regularly described it as reading suspiciously like disinformation, or a misinformation test for social media. Let's see. These are political, not factual complaints, as is Andrew Sullivan's beef that Tucker Carlson tries to sow doubt about the prevalence of white supremacy, or that Sean Hannity likes to blast Biden as cognitively struggling. As to the last place for 4 years, hell, even I wrote one, as were Trump with tiny Wang cartoons and Trump touchingly gay with Putin jokes. Confusing that which you find politically offensive with actually erroneous or deceptive reporting has become so common, even media professionals don't seem to care about the difference anymore. Let's go to the chat. The free press is an abstraction, says Texas Feral Hog. The monsters in the MS conflate themselves with the abstract concept. Metal Mike says chess is racist because white gets the first move. Yes, I saw this story a few days ago that the most popular chess channel on YouTube was being pulled down because of the prevalence of the words white and black in close conjunction to words like attack or defeat. Yeah. Okay. Real-Light Crack says, the problem with all these right-wing voices, all they ever do is complain at the left at this point. That is a waste of time. Real-Light Crack says, fawning over the Myanmar protester Ashley Babbitt, they comb through her social media and badmouthed her. It is so transparent now. Jonathan Pohl says KMG is right. All mainstream journalists are feds. One reason I haven't paid attention to them for many years. Just to be honest, I mean this mostly metaphorically, although in some cases, literally. Euthanasia, do it yourself or don't do it at all, says Texas Feral Hog. Okay, let's go back to it here. Oh, yes, and the UN is involved now. No dissent allowed. This is from Simon Kent at Breitbart. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned Monday the combination of white supremacy and neo-Nazi movements, where are these neo-Nazi movements, makes for a transnational threat through the manipulation of the responses to the global coronavirus pandemic. Reuters, which has recently been found to be involved in the destabilization of Russia, reports Guterres, a former Socialist Party prime minister in his native Portugal, used an address to the UN Human Rights Council, oh, there's a good one, to call for a global coordinated crackdown. Quote, white supremacy and neo-Nazi movements are more than domestic terrorism threats. They're becoming a transnational threat. Today, these extremist movements represent the number one internal security threat in several countries. Without offering any examples of countries he believes are facing this existential threat, Guterres called for international action to defeat the dangers as part of his longstanding commitment to more robust global governance. Robust, eh? Yeah, that's one way to put it. UN Chief Antonio Guterres called for the world to urgently redistribute power, apparently not away from him, though, as to end gender inequality. Impossible, can never happen, which he said, quote, should shame us all in the 21st century because it is not only unacceptable, it is stupid. Well, one would think that it was really that stupid, then it would disappear of its own accord. You know, we've been lectured to for a couple of decades now that, well, yes, more diversity in the workplace, more women on corporate boards, more minorities on corporate boards. Well, if this is so obvious, and I've seen many such reports that claim that the benefits of this diversity are incontrovertible, then why isn't it happening? Particularly since we know how very woke big business is. Far too often, these hate groups are cheered on by people in positions of responsibility. Is he nuts? Who's cheering on neo-Nazi groups? In ways that were considered unimaginable long ago. Yes, they are unimaginable because this is not happening and has not happened. Guterres pointed to governments and health authorities who used heavy-handed security responses and emergency measures to crush dissent. At times, access to life-saving COVID-19 information has been concealed. By whom? How? Well, deadly misinformation has been amplified, including by those in power. Examples, please. Examples, please. Oh, and finally, UN shares Antifa flag tells U.S. Antifa has right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Is that what Antifa is about? And, okay. This is a very interesting piece from American Greatness, which I'm going to have to be careful about. Let's say it refers to a historical event that occurred last November. I'm sure people understand what I'm saying here. And it is from Michael Anton at American Greatness. He writes, recently I appeared as a guest on Andrew Sullivan's podcast. Sullivan is vociferously anti-Trump, so I expected us to disagree, which naturally we did. But I was surprised by the extent to which he insisted I assent to his assertion that a historical event in 2020 was totally on the level. That is to say, I wasn't surprised that Sullivan thinks it was. I was surprised by his evident yearning to hear me say so too, which I could not do. Sullivan badgered me at length about this before finally accusing me of being fixated on the topic, to which I responded truthfully that I was only talking about it because he asked. As far as I'm concerned, this historical event in 2020 is well and truly over. I said, moved on. So I thought. Then I received 2 emails from a friendly acquaintance who is a recognized Republican expert on such things that suggested he too is troubled by my lack of belief. Then came 2 other data points, which I noticed only after the first draft this essay had been completed. Ramesh Ponnuru snarked. Snark seems to be the go-to, indeed the only device in his literary quiver, that one of the anomalies I cited in my most recent article in the Claremont Review of Books had been debunked by the partisan left-wing factcheck.org. Well, I appreciate the insight into the sources from which National Review editors get their facts these days. The quote provided admits that the statistic I cited is well accurate. Ponnuru naturally ignores all the other points raised in my earlier article. Jonathan Chait wrote yet another, his 12th article denouncing me for the same sin of disbelief. Why did he bother? Is there even a remote chance that a single one of his New York Magazine readers either read my article or encountered its argument? Or is he worried that the narrative of this historical event is so fragile that it needs to be shored up? I wanted to move on. I really did. But when the left, Chait, Senator Sullivan, faux right, anti-conservative ankle biter, Ponnuru, and genuine, if establishment right, my correspondent, all agree that my lack of belief is a problem, I wonder why this should be so, and the following observations come to mind. Let me begin by repeating something I said to Sullivan. I don't actively disbelieve in the outcome of this historical event. I do not assert that the historical event was not legitimate. I also do not believe, belief being an affirmative mental state. I say only that I don't know. I haven't been convinced either way. One side tried to convince me and failed, at least so far. The other side has made no such attempt, but instead mostly shouts in my face that I must believe. The latter effort, in addition to being aggravating and insulting, has been less effective. Now, I don't want to go into what he has to say about this historical event last year. I will say this. This is religious belief that we're talking about here. And it's religious belief that is evident of a theocracy. You know, in the Middle Ages, if you didn't spout heresy, you didn't get into trouble. That is no longer sufficient for the belief that's replaced religion. No, silence does not imply consent. Silence is perhaps the worst of all, because you're not bleating with everyone else, convincing them of your bona fides. I want to talk now about James Burnham's The Machiavellians, and we are discussing leadership and Robert Michels. Burnham writes, the customary right to office makes possible an interesting device, frequent in many political organizations, the device of resignation. Now, I discussed that on Friday. More fundamental than the right to office is a psychological need felt by the masses for leadership. This sentiment is a compound of numerous elements, except in most unusual dramatic circumstances, and seldom even then. The bulk of the membership of any large organization is passive with respect to the organizational activities. Only a small percentage of a union's membership comes regularly to meetings. A still smaller part of the membership of a political party provides the active party workers. Consider how difficult it is to get 20,000 party members from among New York City's millions to a Democratic or Republican campaign meeting. And attendance at a meeting is a minor enough activity. In a referendum, only a minority bothers to mail back the ballots. Unless voting is compulsory, only a fraction of the voting population can even be got to the polls. Well, apparently we've solved that problem. How much smaller is the fraction that participates in the constant, active, decisive work of the organization? Michels writes, though it grumbles occasionally, the majority is really delighted to find persons who will take the trouble to look after its affairs. In the mass, and even in the organized mass of the labor parties, there is an immense need for distinct direction and guidance. This need is accompanied by a genuine call for the leaders who are regarded as heroes, unquote. Burnham comments, whatever the causes of this indifference and passivity, and this willingness to let others do the active work of deciding, their existence is plain enough. Moreover, as Machiavelli had also noted, the most striking proof of the organic weakness of the mass is furnished by the way in which, when deprived of their leaders in time of action, they abandon the field of battle in disordered flight. They seem to have no power of instinctive reorganization and are useless unless new captains arise capable of replacing those that have been lost. The failure of innumerable strikes and political agitations is explained very simply by the opportune action of the authorities who have placed the leaders under lock and key. Nor is this phenomenon confined to labor organizations. It may be added that this need for leadership brings about it that the leaders of such organizations as mass political parties or the state are kept extremely busy. Michels writes, quote, their positions are anything but sinecures, and they have acquired their supremacy at the cost of extremely hard work. Their life is one of incessant effort. In democratic organizations, the activity of the professional leader is extremely fatiguing, often destructive to health, and in general, despite the division of labor, highly complex, unquote. Well, I have some experience of this, observing people in political life, including a friend of mine who used to work for me, who became deputy chief of staff to the Premier of British Columbia. And it was made clear that he was willingly going to work himself to death in this job, and he was to be available 24 hours a day. And again, this was supposed to embrace it. Now, I often think that things like issues management, as they call it, are a complete waste of time in politics, but politicians are obsessed with it. When Harper was Prime Minister of Canada, there used to be a daily meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning for all the political staffers and what happened in the news yesterday or overnight. What is our position on this? if you remember the show Veep, or Armando Iannucci's show Veep, you'll recall that the secretary to the vice president, later president, was constantly coming in saying some golfer just died. Should we issue a statement? Or someone on death row was given an injection it didn't take. What's our line on this? Why is it necessary for politicians now to have a line on everything that happens? I remember Hayakawa, the linguistics professor who was elected to the Senate in California in the 1960s, was once asked about his position on dog racing, and he scandalized the press by saying, "I don't give a damn about dog racing." I wish there were more politicians like that. Burnham continues, the masses have deep feelings of political gratitude towards those who seemingly speak and write in their behalf, and who on occasion suffer or have suffered persecution, imprisonment, or exile in the name of their ideals. This gratitude finds ready expression in re-election to office, even where the events which gave occasion for the gratitude lie in a distant and outlived past. Machiavelli was aware also of this natural sentiment of gratitude. In his zeal for the protection of liberty, he warned against it and praised the Romans for not taking into account past services when they were judging a present fault. You see this in elections having to do with incumbents, that the challenger will typically claim that the incumbent is not fit to be president or prime minister or whatever because he has not done a good job. And what does the incumbent say? Well, I'm the president. I've been the prime minister. I've been the president, and you have not. So therefore, you are not qualified to have this job. Which, of course, if we were to take that logic to its limit, well, the presidency of the United States or a prime ministership of Britain, it would be like the Pope's reign, that it goes on until he dies, or I suppose is pushed out, like Benedict XVI. Burnham continues, there are certain qualities, some innate and some acquired by training, but none spread widely and evenly, that make for leadership and are accepted by the mass as doing so. Oratorical talent and the prestige of celebrity in almost any field, how irrelevant, are prominent among them. In addition, quote, numerous and varied are the personal qualities thanks to which certain individuals succeed in ruling the masses. These qualities, which may be considered as specific qualities of leadership, are not necessarily all assembled in every leader. Among them, the chief is the force of will, which reduces to obedience less powerful wills. Next in importance come the following: a wider extent of knowledge, which impresses the members of the leader's environment, a Catonian strength of conviction, a force of ideas, often verging on fanaticism, and which arouses the respect of the masses by its very intensity, self-sufficiency, even if accompanied by arrogant pride, so long as the leader knows how to make the crowd share his own pride in himself. In exceptional cases, finally, goodness of heart and disinterestedness, qualities which recall in the minds of the crowd the figure of Christ and reawaken religious sentiments which are decayed but not extinct, unquote. And Burnham continues, in the case of great organizations with important activities, the state, political parties, mass trade unions, and for that matter, large industrial and commercial corporations, the mass, both as a body and in terms of most of the individuals composing it, is incompetent to carry on the work. This follows not only from the psychological qualities already mentioned, but because of the lack of the required knowledge, skill, and training. The work, even the routine through which the work is carried on, the intricacies of parliamentary procedure, for example, is exceedingly complex. Even with native ability, time is required to become effective at it. With respect to the organizational tasks, the leaders possess a genuine superiority over the mass, and of this they are well aware. Mickles writes, here as elsewhere, the saying is true that no undertaking can succeed without leaders, without managers. In parallelism with the corresponding phenomena in industrial and commercial life, it is evident that with the growth of working class or any other organization, there must be an accompanying growth in the value, the importance, and the authority of the leaders, unquote. And Burnham concludes, in short, the leaders, not every individual leader, but the leadership as a group, and a group with at least a considerable measure of stability and permanence are indispensable to every important organization. Their genuine indispensability is the strongest lever whereby the position of the leadership is consolidated, whereby the leaders control and are not controlled by the mass, whereby, therefore, democracy succumbs. The power of the leadership organized as an informal subgroup, independent of the mass of the membership, follows as a necessary consequence of its indispensability. And tomorrow we will begin to talk about the autocracy of leadership. I have talked for some time, been a theme of mine, the possibility of a collapse of civilization. And I don't mean this in a metaphorical sense, I mean it in a real sense. There's a piece on Revolver, February the 17th, called Texas Power Grid Disaster is Only the Beginning. The mess with the Texas power grid is only the beginning. In the years to come, American infrastructure will fail more and more often as America becomes less capable of maintaining the core elements of a first world country. Why would America become less first world? That's a simple question to answer, because America is making itself less first world. Conservatives have been eager to blame Texas's problem on the increased use of wind power. It certainly played a role. Turbines froze in the cold, and the focus on expanding renewable energy sources over conventional gas and oil left the state less able to expand energy production in response to a surge. But solar energy is far from the only culprit. Another factor was simply that Texas infrastructure could not handle an outlier weather event. Faced with a black swan event, Texas power generation system imploded. It faced a major challenge and wasn't up to it. The cost of several lives and billions of dollars in economic damage. Texas struggles are only a standard example of a problem that has been building up for years. Last summer, California suffered rolling blackouts because electrical providers were unprepared for a surge in demand during a heat wave. But the problem is greater than that. America's electrical reliability has been declining almost everywhere for decades. The United States of America now trails competing nations, often dramatically. In Japan, the average home sees only 4 minutes of power outages per year. In the American Midwest, the figure is 92. In the Northeast, it's 214 minutes. All those figures cover only regular outages and not those caused by extreme weather or fires. And we see by looking at a chart here that as far as reliability goes, the United States is now distinctly inferior to Austria, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, and the United Kingdom. Now, this naturally raises the question: if infrastructure is aging, why isn't it being updated or replaced? That is a political question with many answers. One reason is that maintaining existing infrastructure may be the single less sexy use of public money, and thus is one of the first things cut back during budget crunches. Another factor, though, is America's warped public spending. For decades, politicians have found it easy to build up a political base by upping the pay of public employees. The result is that, while enjoying rock-solid job security, public employees at all levels out-earn private sector workers. Millions of current and former workers are also the beneficiaries of ridiculously generous pension plans, which are routinely underfunded as well. When these pensions clash with basic infrastructure maintenance, the pensions win. But infrastructure isn't just about allocating enough funding, it's about people. The quality of a country's broad-based infrastructure is heavily linked to the skills of its common blue-collar workers and local bureaucrats. When these groups are more capable, everything works a little bit better in a country. They cut few corners when building new infrastructure and are more diligent in maintaining it. They work more diligently in efficiency. They are more likely to use the right materials. They avoid preventable errors. For an example of a completely avoidable infrastructure calamity, look at Flint, Michigan. The city's famous water crisis occurred when the city switched from Detroit's water system to drawing water from the Flint River. The river water was perfectly safe to drink, but left untreated, it corroded the protective lining of the city's pipes, eventually allowing lead to leach into the water. And tragically, avoiding that problem was easy. And there follows a quote from Chemical and Engineering News. Cities such as Detroit add orthophosphate to their water as part of their corrosion control plans because the compound encourages the formation of lead phosphates, which are largely insoluble and can add to the pipe's passivation layer. By press time, Chemical and Engineering News was unable to get a comment from Flint City officials about why a corrosion inhibitor wasn't added to the river water. The entire Flint water crisis could have been avoided if the city had just added orthophosphate. Adding orthophosphate would have cost Flint only a few $1,000s a year. Instead, a $600 million calamity happened. Another flag for America's infrastructure failure is the Washington, D.C. Metro. The Metro has been known for years as one of the world's worst, plagued with delays, safety issues, cost overruns, and poor maintenance. By the early 2000s, workers began to notice a growing disregard for safety throughout Metro, according to the Washingtonian. We'd report safety violations and then nothing would be done, said Sermon Johnson, a WMATA mechanic from 1983 to 2010. Meanwhile, management focused on making sure employees wore their uniforms correctly and use Metro-issued microwaves to cook food instead of their own. This wasn't the only troubling thing the feds found in Metro's plumbing. The FTA discovered that train drivers regularly relieved themselves on the tracks because supervisors, due to inadequate training, weren't comfortable taking the wheel to give them bathroom breaks. How did the Metro get so horrid? In large part because of wretched hiring. A 2020 report in the Washington Times, and I'll break in to say that I was shocked that this was printed, particularly in that source, revealed that Metro hiring was starkly racialized, with applicants clearly being hired or rejected based on skin color rather than demonstrated job aptitude. Quote, 97% of the bus and train operators at Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority are Black. With only 6 white women out of more than 3,000 drivers, it is a culture in which a white male engineer near completion of a PhD was passed over for a management position in favor of a Black man who was barely literate, multiple staffers said. Dozens said white workers, especially women, were openly subject to racist and sexist remarks without repercussion, behavior that drove many targets to seek transfers or leave the agencies. All said they have been inexplicably passed over hundreds of times for promotions to positions such as station manager, while others with less seniority passed them by. Now, I can testify that if you've ever known anyone who had to use the Washington Metro, they never stopped talking about how horrible it is. And in fact, that is a built-in excuse for being late, seriously late for any job in the Metro area. How come you're late? The Metro, Oh, yes, of course. The Metro. For decades, America's ruling elite have deliberately cultivated an underclass via low-skill immigration, both legal and illegal. While they were brought here as workers, these immigrants are people as well. Their children are the future human capital stock of the United States. And, yes, dysgenic policies. That is what America is ending up with. Of course, the same is true all over the West. But diversity über alles. I'm sure many of you saw this story, which was everywhere. California OnlyFans mom Crystal Jackson says her kids were expelled from school. This is from the New York Post. Yaron Steinbuch. A California woman who peddles sexy snaps and videos online said her 3 young kids had been kicked out of a Catholic school because of her activity. Crystal Jackson, known as Tiffany Poindexter, or Mrs. Poindexter on the OnlyFans app, claims to rake in more than $150,000 a month selling access to naughty photos and videos taken by her hubby, Chris. Her hubby. See, in the New York Post stories, people don't have husbands, they have hubbies. We don't have children, we have kids or kiddies. But her seductive venture has landed her in hot water at her kids' Sacred Heart Parish School in Sacramento, which she said has expelled them. The principal said that the family is no longer welcome at the elementary school and even barred them from picking up the children's belongings. Jackson said a group of moms, always moms, never mothers, discovered her site last summer and started a campaign to get her kids kicked out of the school. At one point, the group sent anonymous envelopes, including her explicit material, to the diocese and principal. They wanted my kids removed who are innocent to this whole thing, Jackson said. Now it's kind of like we got caught. Here is our secret life exposed. Yes, the sins of the mother and father. Never heard about that before? Tippy? Your apparent quest for high-profile controversy in support of your adult website is in direct conflict with what we hope to impart to our students. According to the diocese, we therefore require that you find another school for your children and have no further association with ours, out of the email, which was reportedly signed by Principal Teresa Sparks. Jackson said she would continue to post on her OnlyFans page and that the couple is applying to send the kids to another Catholic school, but is worried they may be banned completely by the city's diocese. The mother said that her seductive venture began with a post on Reddit as a way to spice up her romance with her hubby. Someone was like, hey, why don't you start an OnlyFans? Jackson said, we're like, what the heck is that? Her husband said they think of it as an artistic or sultry and sexy and fun and playful, but certainly nothing hardcore. Crystal, who was removed as the second grade room mom 2 weeks ago, said, you're taking these innocent children and you're punishing them for something you don't agree with. These are pornographic photos. There's no question about them. They're not hardcore, but they are pornographic. And I have to report that Crystal, or Tiffany, or what her name is a very attractive woman. Especially given her age and the fact that she's had 3 children. But why she would want to boast about this and act as if she is hard done by. Oh, I guess it's a jealousy of the other parents or envy, I suppose. It could very well be envy, because I'm sure most of the other mothers at the school are not as good looking as she is, but that is rather beside the point. Again, I'm just going to express my continued disbelief at the very existence of OnlyFans. Now, okay, since there's approximately 79 trillion nude pictures on the internet for free, why would anyone pay for these or for videos? Am I supposed to believe that the people who subscribe to an OnlyFans channel, they've made a personal connection with the person who's distributing the pornography? Is that what I'm supposed to believe? Leave aside the fact that everything that gets put on the internet gets pirated. So doubtless the entirety of Crystal or Tiffany's pornographic output exists somewhere on the internet for free. Oh, yes, shame. Nobody has any shame anymore. What is the purpose of the Canadian Forces? They're called the Canadian Forces, not the Canadian Armed Forces, by the way, just the Canadian Forces. Armed would be problematic, too aggressive. This is from 3 days ago from Global News. In her words, one of the women behind Vance allegations tells her story. So the Canadian Forces is being rocked by a story regarding the former Chief of Defense Staff, General Jonathan Vance. Major Kelly Brennan says the time has come to tell her story. For years, she says she had nowhere to turn, despite telling military superiors in the chain of command about the intimate sexual relationship she says she had with former Chief of Defense Staff, General Vance, while he was her superior. But always, she says, the response was the same. It was a hot potato that nobody knew what to do with, said Brennan. Okay. So this affair went on for years, and it was consensual. And Kelly Brennan is a spurned lover, because at one point Vance said, this can't go on anymore. Nevertheless, she continued to get promoted And I remember back in the 90s, 1994, I think it was, I wrote a cover story about whether women were going to be fully integrated into the Canadian military. And I interviewed a bunch of generals and military experts. And, well, I think you know the story. That you're going to have the men and women sleeping with each other. And the rules against fraternization are simply just going to fall away, completely fall away, which is what we have seen. But that doesn't mean that the decision was wrong. So apparently the Canadian military has to be turned upside down, and I think a lot of men fired. Yes, Vance became Chief of Defense Staff in 2015 following a damning report by former Supreme Court Justice Marie Deschamps that found sexual misconduct was rampant throughout the military. Oh, who could have predicted that? Well, I did. In response, he launched Operation Honor, which had the mission to root out misconduct and eliminate sexual misconduct in the military. Yeah, a Canadian general who told me I could not mention his name with respect to this comment told me, this is a direct quotation, "We have enough trouble with the men having sex with each other without bringing women into it." The Deschamps report also highlighted a challenge of power dynamics in the military when it comes to the ability to give consent. Yes, of course, that apparently women have no power in sexual relations with men. We've all been told this so often that we actually believe it, but it is so self-evidently fatuous that I can't help but laugh. There is an essay here from the American Sun by, I believe, someone who listens to, or at least occasionally listens to this live stream, Lamprey Milt, he calls himself, and it's about incels. No one had heard of incels, and suddenly everyone knows them, knows about them, everyone hates them. Actually, I read a lot about Elliot Rodger, the supreme gentleman, at the time. I read what his diary and his manifesto. Obviously, clearly disturbed man, caught between two cultures. It seemed to me that apparently it had never been made clear to him that if he wanted to be with a woman, he would have to make some simple effort to approach them, ask them out for coffee or something. No. Apparently, Elliot Rodger, the supreme gentleman, thought that for some reason that women were going to be flocking to him. Lamprey Milt writes February 18th at the American Sun, "We have heard much about incels recently, but just who is controlling the narrative for so-called involuntary celibates? How did this designation coalesce into a discrete subgroup in the first place, under what circumstances, and for what purpose? I recently interviewed prominent incel streamers to hear from those who subscribe to this point of view, one which I strongly suspect to be manufactured. I'd begun questioning the narrative surrounding the incel designation since it seemed to have come out of nowhere. I've been entrenched in red pill-related topics, and I had not even once heard the term incel until the Alec Manassian van attack took place on April 23rd, 2018 in Toronto. Then suddenly, the epithet of incel was everywhere. Most manosphere subgroups are echo chambers promoting self-isolation, self-actualization, and self-improvement. These are all entirely rational choices and a legitimate means of empowering oneself during a societal collapse. If one is atomized to the point where it's easy to go unnoticed for days or months, why not embrace it? The problem, of course, is that it's unnatural to self-isolate since man is a social animal. But how does the social animal adapt to a cultural circumstance in which he is increasingly being left out of? I remember seeing a bombardment of commercials for Axe body spray and BOD in middle school. Ads promoting somatic views of men, implying that if you didn't buy their product, you would be regulated to the role of beta orbiter. Many young men just assume that having rock solid abs, a perfect haircut, a chiseled jawline, and a wardrobe full of the latest fashions would give you a greater chance of getting laid. I was never susceptible to such marketing gimmicks, yet I clearly remember many male teenagers falling for it. They went and bought oversized polos and were hitting the gym on the regular, always anxiously gazing at themselves in the mirror to see if they measured up to the ideal fad that had been foisted upon them by their social engineers. What technology has done is it moved from the mirror to the photograph, from the photograph to the digital photograph, from the digital camera to the built-in camera in our smartphones. The incel community has embraced the vanity and insecurities of women as they internalize the locus of control in superficiality. Such ideas of looks maxing, white maxing, and surgery maxing are all in the realm of appearance. The incel belief that looks are all important for the achievement of romantic success leads to them even going so far as contemplating the intentional mutilation of their body. I'll just mention a story. This fellow I work with, he was He was in his late 20s. He was an Oxbridge graduate. He was tall, over 6 feet tall. He was in good shape. He was handsome, and he was well-spoken. And I saw him strike out with women again and again and again and again because he gave off a creep factor. It was that simple. There was a restaurant that we used to go to, people I worked with, and eventually all of the servers and the hostesses had been warned about him. And again, if you looked at him, if you heard him speak, you think, how could this fellow have been so unsuccessful? But obviously, there's a plethora of reasons for why women choose some men over the others. Anyway, Lamprey Melt continues. The typical incel social skills are stunted and atrophic since he lacks any form of social feedback to see what does or doesn't work when communicating with the opposite sex. What further fuels the wasting away of communication are young women's flat personalities. Her communication skills are insincere and solipsistic. She has zero interest in getting to know the other. If anything he says or writes that forces her to acknowledge his existence, she quickly removes him from her internal Rolodex. She wants, yes, I'll say this. She wants a walking sex toy that spews diamonds and never-ending vacations, the perpetual Disney dreams. Women today portray themselves as hypersexual and histrionic and frequently have bizarre sexual codes of conduct, body lore. One often sees them in scantily clad clothing talking about the thought of sex, but it seems that this behavior is largely manipulative. They dress or undress to be noticed, yet if they receive unwanted attention, they get offended and accuse those ogling them as harassers. The sanity of my body, my choice, but the body is constantly being defiled. This behavior contributes to self-destructive attitude in young men, particularly those who perceive themselves to be low on the social totem pole. It's all contradictory as both sexes engage in an avoid approach repetition. This gives rise to cognitive dissonance psyche and a maladjusted citizenry. When women reject someone who identifies as an incel, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, feeding on itself like the sinister Ouroboros snake of legend. Many in the incel community state they have taken the black pill. It's no secret that the black pill is a term for a depressive state that embraces misanthropy and apathy. One might say that taking the black pill is a kill to being stuck in the anger stage of the 5 stages of grief. It is my suspicion that the concept of incel was astroturfed in its nascency to cause a more significant schism between the sexes, making both men and women feel less safe around each other. Undeniably, there are prominent forces in our culture who benefit from promoting gender disharmony. I did a quick search on Google Trends to see if my idea might hold water. I found that the term incel was quick to develop an infrastructure with its own incel wiki, various forums popping up all within a few months of each other. The alt-right was quick to embrace lingo, which was born out of inceldom. Terms such as Chad, Becky, Stacy, LARPing, Normie, Coomer, Cuck, and Cuck Carousel were just a few examples of this shared lingo and terminology. I highly recommend this essay, and it concludes, viewed connotatively, the very word incel exudes a whiff of danger. On the one hand, it savors of imprisonment, men who dwell, it could be said, in cells of loneliness. But cell can also signify something tiny and secretive, but potentially deadly, like a terror cell or a cancer cell. So the incel categorization winds up evoking introverted deviancy. In a post-Trump America, the media will increasingly set its sights on this new demographic, thus reclassifying single heterosexual males as potential terrorists who need to be monitored. Given the woeful state of current sexual mores, the incel community is likely to grow exponentially, thus dragging any form of moderate boys' clubs into it, as the misogyny they boldly enunciate will become yet another excuse for increased mass surveillance. With the Overton window busted wide open, incel has been an approved outlet by our techno-oligarchs as a path of rebellion. Apparently, if you're searching for love or whatever on the internet, don't hold a cat. Okay. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle. Is your cat destroying your love life? This study says yes. This is from Laura Fur. Oh, come on. That can't be right. Laura Fur Mercius. Okay. And I'm looking at a tortoiseshell cat, which seems, it seems overweight. It's no secret. Straight guys often use pets to get dates, and it works. There's even science that backs it up. But according to a new study, first reported by the Wall Street Journal, dudes need to ditch their cats in their dating profiles if they are really serious about securing a Valentine. Sounds brutal. But again, we're just looking at the science, folks. The study featured in the peer-reviewed journal Animals, and amazingly titled Not the Cat's Meow, the impact of posing with cats on female perceptions of male dateability, found that heterosexual males posing with a cat in the photos were less masculine when holding the cat, higher in neuroticism, agreeableness, and openness, and less dateable. So agreeableness, openness make one less dateable. This was a study of 1,300 women. An expert at Match.com even backed it up. Rachel Dalto, Match's chief dating expert, told the Wall Street Journal that straight men had a 5% lower chance of landing a like on their site when it was revealed they had a cat. Straight women with cats were 7% less likely. Are deviations of 5 and 7% statistically significant? I rather doubt that they are, but you see, they've buried the lead here. Apparently, it is less damaging for a man to hold a cat in a platform than for a woman. The scientists behind the study admitted that their findings were more than a little limited. Both guys are white, thin, college-aged, and according to the Wall Street Journal, clearly preppy. They plan to do a broader study representing a more globalized skin tone in the future to ensure that it's really the cat women are turned off by, not Sutter himself. I mean, look at these guys. I would just say, in my non-expert opinion, that they look, wimpy and not masculine. That would be how I would interpret them. Still, the online dating evidence isn't doing felines any favor. According to the article, dogs give straight and gay men a 20% higher chance on average for scoring a like, and women a 3% higher likelihood. Yeah, gay men. Kinokure informs us they love dogs. They love dogs. And one final story in this topic. Let's talk about simps. You know what simps are? Well, simps are the kind of people who send money to women with OnlyFans accounts. But I don't think that's what CNN is going to tell us. This is from Terry Ward. The new slang teens use to insult boys who are too nice to girls. Shannon was used to her socially awkward son being bullied by other boys at the private school he attends in Atlanta. But when she picked him up from school in mid-January and her 8th grader told her he was being called a simp, Shannon, who's only using her first name to protect her son's identity, is that really such a common name amongst women? She didn't know what to think. He's telling me this, and I'm driving, and I'm trying to make sense of it. She said, I'd never heard the word. He told me, basically, it means I'm being nice to girls because I like them. I was like, wait, my kid is being picked on for being nice to girls. Her son had told her that he'd recently been put in the friend zone by one of the girls who made it clear she wasn't interested in dating him. They had continued to be friendly. You do all these things as a parent to raise your kid right, to be nice to everyone, especially kids without many friends, Shannon said. And you would never think that by making your kid the nice one, you could be making them a target for bullies. Really? You never thought that, Shannon? And by the way, is there a Mr. Shannon here? Because perhaps if there were a Mr. Shannon, he could have told his son that sucking up to women in a really obvious way, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Well, many parents might be unfamiliar with the word simp. Chances are your tween or teen has used or at least heard of them. Such hashtags are rampant on TikTok. Instagram has over 350,000 posts tagged simp, and there are Facebook groups devoted to simps and simping. It can be a verb, too. Depending on who you talk to, there is some debate on the word's current usage and how much, if at all, it has evolved over time. While simp's way back origins are connected to the word simpleton, its current usage is linked to West Coast American rappers like Too Short, who first used it in the mid-1980s in a way that denotes the opposite of pimp in his song Pimpology. In 1992, Boyz II Men released a song called Simpin' Ain't Easy, using a different spelling of the word and evoking frustrated yearning. I was once told a long time ago, I read somewhere, that WIMP is actually an acronym for Why I Must Prevaricate. Right from the beginning, doubted that. It seemed a little too pat. But back to the story. The Urban Dictionary's top definition of simp is someone who does way too much for a person they like. Other definitions on the crowdsourced online dictionary include a man who puts the hoes before the bros, and a guy who is overly desperate for women, especially if she is a bad person or has expressed her disinterest in him, which he continues to obsess over. That's not what disinterest means, but never mind that. Simp is slang for a person, typically a man who is desperate for the attention and affection of someone else, typically a woman, said Connor Howlett, 23, a digital strategist for Turner PR in New York City. Think of the energy of puppy dog eyes, but manifested in a romantic human form, he said. It's used in an insulting manner, though typically playful. There are definitely undertones of toxic masculinity, since related to showing too much emotion. Florida mother Karen McClung first encountered the word in group chats she closely monitors with her 11-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son. I saw the word and quickly looked it up, said McClung, who lives in Tampa. I asked my kids what they thought it meant, and my son said, it's basically if you had $1,000 and you could do anything with it, you'd use it to get the attention of a girl, then everyone would make fun of you, unquote. I blocked the thread, McClung said. When she said that her son wasn't being called a simp in the thread, McClung said she's curious to see how it impacts my son because he's very chivalrous by nature. You like Elliot Rodger, the supreme gentleman? A simp can have different contexts depending on the age group using it, said Laura Capinas, a clinical social worker in Sonoma County, California. Depending on if it's a middle schooler or a high schooler using it, it could be different. Girls in high school sometimes throw out the term to their high school girlfriends. Some kids I've talked to have said it's not a derogatory term. It's sort of teasing someone like, you've left us to go hang out with your friends. You're simping us. Yeah, but it is a derogatory term. It may be mildly derogatory, but still derogatory. If you have someone saying it who's used to being a bully, it will be received as a bully comment. Well, she hasn't heard kids or parents in her practice be overly concerned about the word. Oh, that will change. That's going to change. Capinas also hears kids use it in describing their day or their peer groups. One way to think of a simp, said Sean Davis, a marriage and family therapist in Sacramento, California, is simply someone who is ahead of their time. Does Sean Davis really believe this? Though it hurts in the moment, in the big picture, a boy who is called a simp can wear it as a badge of honor. Today's boys are being raised in the middle of the biggest redefinition of male gender roles in recent history. Should I be kind and sensitive or distant and aloof when trying to win a partner over? I don't know. How about we look at what works with women and what doesn't work with women? And this is fairly well known. Getting $1,000, I don't know, let's say you inherit $1,000, you're a teenager and you spend it all on a woman. Teenage girl, well, she's liable to think that there's something seriously wrong with you, because why would anyone do that? But CNN is here to tell us that everything we know is wrong. Anyway, let's have a final look at the chat. I see people complaining about buffering. I guess I neglected to clear the cache today. Max Vitriol says, Lefty Paolo, what's this? Backgulpies? Pump 6 is a humorous updating of Kornblith's The Marching Morons and deals with affirmative action hires running the infrastructure. I was talking about Randall Jarrell last week with regard to 12 O'Clock High. And I should mention that Jarrell wrote a novel, I believe as early as 1954, about his experiences at Smith College. It's called Pictures at an Institution. And it's a real eye-opener, because you thought that, college culture only became crazy lately. Well, it would seem that it's become crazy, or at least at the Seven Sisters, an equivalent, for a long time. Okay. All right. Imagine that marriage therapist trying to help your relationship. Yes. Oh, I see your husband gets picked on all the time, and you have to listen to him being insulted by his friends and coworkers. No, that's actually a good thing, Mrs. It means he's ahead of his time. Okay. Never take advice on girls from your mom, says Chokokin 666. Yes, that is a very good advice. Roulette Crack says, a simp and his money are soon parted. Adam says people don't even know what it means to be a man anymore, or a woman for that matter, so they just try not to be a simp, an incel, or a cat lover, or fill in the blank. Just pathetic, lost souls. I read that novel. I talked about it, a year or two ago. Finally, some good news by Delicious Tacos, and he made a comparison there, which I've subsequently found useful, that with women, small dog is a baby substitute. Large dog, husband substitute. Okay, I see that the men and women cannot be friends. It's that simple, says British American. Yeah, I would say whether there's any possibility of a sexual relationship, no, they cannot be friends. So that is the show for today. I will be back on the air tomorrow. And tomorrow I'm going to be talking about a movie called Mildred Pierce, which was directed by Michael Curtiz from 1945, from the novel by James M. Cain. And it stars Joan Crawford in perhaps her most memorable role. On the book club on Friday, I'm talking about a book called, let's just say that it's Klaus Schwab's book about recent medical events and how he believes they're going to transform the world. Okay? And, I'm trying to be as less ridiculous about this as possible. But given that I'm subject to being suspended or banned, and I don't know why specifically, better to be safe than sorry. So I will be back on the air tomorrow, Thursday, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, very, very much appreciated at this time. My PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, a donation to this live stream can be made directly through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and societal collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.